The air in Department 14 of the municipal court was thick with the usual blend of stale coffee, anxiety, and the faint, metallic scent of disinfectant that never quite masked the underlying grimness. It was Tuesday, a day like any other, and the docket was a seemingly endless parade of minor infractions: public intoxication, loitering, petty theft. Each case was a small, sad testament to lives teetering precariously on the edge, often just one missed paycheck, one unexpected medical bill, or one devastating bad decision away from a freefall into the abyss of homelessness and despair. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a cold, unforgiving glow on the worn benches and the faces of those waiting, many of whom seemed to carry the same weary resignation as Marcus. At the defense table, Marcus M.J. Jones sat hunched, his shoulders bearing not just the threadbare weight of his oversized, stained coat, which served as his only blanket on cold, unforgiving nights, but the invisible, crushing burden of years spent enduring the raw, unforgiving elements of the streets. His face, a deeply etched roadmap of harsh experiences, was lined with the relentless sun, the biting wind, and the gnawing hunger that had become his constant companions. It was a canvas of quiet, almost profound resignation. He had long ago ceased to expect anything good or hopeful from the world, only the next challenge, the next cold night, the next fleeting, uncertain moment of peace. His spirit, though not entirely broken, was deeply worn, like an old, tarnished coin passed through too many indifferent hands, its original luster long gone, its value forgotten. He was charged with petty theft, specifically a single loaf of day-old bread and a dented can of lukewarm generic soup from a brightly lit, sterile convenience store. It was a desperate act, born of a gnawing physical emptiness that had become his constant companion, a hollow ache in his stomach that mirrored a deeper emotional void. No amount of pride, no lingering sense of self-worth from a life once lived with purpose could fill that emptiness. He had tried to hold on to it, that pride, that sense of self, but the relentless grind of survival had slowly eroded it, leaving him feeling less like a man and more like a ghost. The public defender, a young woman named Sarah Chen, her face a mixture of earnestness and visible fatigue from her overwhelming caseload, spoke softly to him. Her voice was a gentle hum against the courtroom's low murmur, a stark, almost jarring contrast to the harsh, brutal realities Marcus faced daily. She knew his story, or at least the official, sanitized version filed away in her brief. A veteran, honorably discharged years ago, who had, for reasons unknown and meticulously unrecorded in his sparse file, simply fallen through the cracks of society's safety nets, landing hard and fast on the unforgiving pavement. Sarah saw countless cases like his, men and women chewed up and spat out by a system ill-equipped to handle the complexities of trauma and poverty. She felt a familiar pang of helplessness, knowing that even a dismissal might only offer a temporary reprieve. What she didn't know, what few remembered or cared to recall, was the vibrant, purposeful man he had been before the streets claimed him, before the light in his eyes dimmed and the last embers of hope in his heart flickered out, replaced by the dull, persistent ache of mere survival. Marcus had served, not just served, but fought with distinction, a fact now obscured by the grime and despair that clung to him. 2 grueling tours in Afghanistan, a combat engineer, a man whose hands, now calloused and stained from scavenging for scraps and sleeping rough, had once built crucial bridges under relentless enemy fire, cleared treacherous paths through deadly minefields, and fortified vulnerable positions while the enemy rained down mortar rounds and small arms fire. He'd seen things, done things, endured things that most people only witnessed on flickering news screens or read about in sanitized history books, detached from the visceral reality. He remembered the searing heat, the choking dust, the constant thrum of fear and adrenaline. He remembered the faces of his comrades, the camaraderie forged in the crucible of combat, and the chilling silence that followed the explosions. The medals he'd earned for valor and sacrifice, the Bronze Star for meritorious service, the Purple Heart for wounds sustained in combat, and indeed the Silver Star for exceptional gallantry, were long gone, pawned or traded for a few dollars, melted down into the fleeting warmth of a single night's shelter, a brief respite from the relentless cold, or a meager meal that barely staved off starvation for another day. He carried the scars, both visible, a jagged line above his left eyebrow from shrapnel, a slight, almost imperceptible limp from an old, poorly healed leg wound that still ached in the damp, and invisible, deep within his psyche. These were the lingering echoes of combat trauma, the ghosts of fallen comrades, the survivor's guilt, and the profound sense of loss that had never truly left him. But they were his alone now, a private museum of a life lived with profound purpose and nearly lost to indifference and neglect. The stark, almost unbearable contrast between the disciplined, courageous soldier he once was, a man relied upon, a leader, a hero, and the broken, anonymous figure he had become was a chasm he rarely dared to contemplate, lest the overwhelming pain and regret consume him entirely, threatening to drag him further into the abyss. His transition back to civilian life had been abrupt, the support systems inadequate, and the invisible wounds had festered, slowly isolating him until the streets became his only refuge. A sudden, sharp hush fell over the courtroom, cutting through the desultory chatter, the rustle of papers, and the low hum of the fluorescent lights as the bailiff's voice boomed, "All rise." The Honorable Judge Eleanor Vance presiding. The command, though routine and delivered countless times each day, carried an undeniable weight, a daily, solemn reminder of the immense power and responsibility vested in the woman who was about to enter, the arbiter of so many fates. Judge Vance swept in, a figure of imposing grace and quiet, undeniable authority in her meticulously tailored black robes. Her movements were precise, economical, reflecting years of practice and a deep understanding of courtroom theater. Her presence commanded immediate respect, not just from her elevated position on the bench, but from the palpable aura of sharp intellect, extensive legal experience, and a deep, almost intuitive understanding of human nature that subtly surrounded her. Her reputation preceded her, whispered in the hallways among seasoned lawyers, and confirmed by every precise, well-reasoned ruling she delivered, sharp, meticulous, and unyielding in her strict application of the letter of the law. She was known for her fairness, but also for her adherence to procedure, rarely deviating from the established path. Yet, to those who observed closely enough, beyond the stern exterior, there was also known to be a quiet, almost imperceptible undercurrent of compassion that sometimes softened the harsh edges of her rulings, a subtle, humane nod to the inherent complexities of human lives and the often tragic circumstances that brought them before her. She settled into her high-backed leather chair with a practiced ease, the slight creak of the leather the only sound in the momentarily silent room, her gaze sweeping across the rows of faces before her, a swift, analytical assessment of each person, each one a fragment of a story she was about to hear, and, ultimately, to judge. Her eyes, though keen, held a certain weariness, the burden of countless difficult decisions. The morning proceeded with its predictable, monotonous rhythm, a bureaucratic ballet of minor offenses and legal technicalities, each case a quick transaction. Plea bargains were struck with swift, almost mechanical efficiency, often whispered between attorneys and nervous defendants in hushed tones, their fates decided in mere minutes. Minor fines were levied against anxious defendants who fidgeted with their hands, their meager savings further depleted by court costs. Probation terms were set, often with little genuine hope of true rehabilitation for those caught in the relentless cycle of poverty, addiction, and desperation that seemed to ensnare so many. Marcus watched it all, his eyes vacant, glazed over, as if observing a poorly acted play in which he was merely an unwilling extra, waiting for his cue to step onto the stage of his own inevitable downfall. He felt a profound sense of detachment, as if his body were present, but his mind had retreated to a safer, more distant place. He knew his part by heart, having seen it played out countless times by others. Guilty, expected to be remorseful, and ultimately disposable. Just another nameless statistic in the endless, impersonal churn of the justice system. He didn't expect leniency, nor did he crave it, for hope had long since become a luxury he couldn't afford, a cruel illusion he had learned to discard. He only desired the swift conclusion of this charade, this public humiliation, so he could return to the familiar anonymity of the alleys and underpasses, the only place he felt truly free from judgment and truly invisible from a world that had so thoroughly forgotten him. The brightly lit courtroom, with its judging eyes, echoing pronouncements and the suffocating weight of its formality, felt like a sterile, inescapable cage, and he yearned for the quiet solitude and familiar dampness of his cardboard box, his only sanctuary. "Next case," Judge Vance announced, her voice clear, resonant, and betraying no hint of the extraordinary, life-altering moment that was about to unfold. A moment that would ripple through the lives of everyone present, leaving an indelible mark on their understanding of justice and humanity. Case number 23, CR 0712, The People versus Marcus Jones. Sarah Chen stood, her legal pad with its hastily scribbled notes, mostly generic defense strategies for minor theft, boilerplate arguments she used daily almost by rote, clutched tightly in her hand, a nervous energy radiating from her. Her brow was furrowed with a mixture of professional duty and genuine concern for her client, whose chances seemed slim to none in the face of the overwhelming evidence and his lack of resources. "Ready, Your Honor," she managed, her voice a little higher than usual, betraying her own anxiety for Marcus, who seemed utterly resigned to his fate, his silence more eloquent than any plea. Marcus, prompted by a gentle nudge from Sarah, rose slowly, his movements stiff from the cold nights spent on hard ground and the unyielding courtroom bench, a dull ache in his joints that was a constant companion. His gaze remained fixed on a faded scuff mark on the polished marble floor, a small, insignificant imperfection he found easier to focus on than the judging eyes of the court, which felt like spotlights exposing his every failure, every moment of weakness. He felt the familiar knot of shame and dread tighten in his stomach, a cold, hard stone settling in his gut, anticipating the inevitable pronouncement of his guilt. This was it, the moment of judgment, the final public pronouncement of his worthlessness in the eyes of the law, a system he no longer believed in, a system that had seemed to fail him at every turn since he returned from war. He braced himself for the swift, impersonal verdict, ready for the next chapter of his quiet suffering, whatever form it might take. Judge Vance picked up the case file, her fingers brushing against the thin manila folder, its contents a stark summary of his life, reduced to a few lines of legal jargon. Her eyes scanned the summary of charges, the defendant's name, the brief background details provided by the prosecution. Marcus Jones, she read aloud, her voice steady, devoid of inflection, a mere recitation of facts from a document, a name among countless others on a long docket. It was a name she had read thousands of times in her career, a common enough name, yet this time it was different. But then something shifted. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible to anyone not watching her closely, a mere tightening around her eyes, a slight catch in her breath, a momentary flicker that crossed her face. The judge's eyes, which had been cool, analytical, and detached moments before, widened almost imperceptibly, as if a veil had been lifted. Her brow furrowed, a faint, almost pained line appearing between her eyebrows, as if a forgotten chord had been struck deep within her memory, vibrating with an unexpected intensity that bordered on a physical sensation. She paused, her gaze lifting from the document, not to Marcus directly, but to some distant point beyond the courtroom walls, beyond the present moment, as if retrieving a vivid, almost cinematic memory from the deepest, most guarded chambers of her mind. The courtroom, accustomed to the judge's brisk efficiency and unwavering focus, noticed the hesitation. A few whispers broke out in the gallery, quickly shushed by the vigilant bailiff, but the ripple of curiosity had already begun, a subtle current of unease and anticipation spreading through the room, a collective sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Judge Vance's hand, resting on the dark wood of the bench, trembled ever so slightly, a tremor that belied her usual composure, a clear sign of an intense internal struggle or a profound emotional realization. Her eyes, now fixed intently on Marcus, seemed to pierce through the layers of grime, the matted hair, the worn clothing, and the despair that clung to him like a shroud. She saw something far beyond the man standing, accused of stealing a loaf of bread, something that resonated with a distant, powerful echo from her own past. A flicker of recognition, sharp and undeniable, then something deeper, a profound, almost reverent understanding that transcended the simple facts of the case and reached into a shared, traumatic past. It was as if a forgotten, sacred piece of her own history, a pivotal moment she had thought long buried, had suddenly materialized before her, demanding immediate and profound acknowledgement. The air in the courtroom seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken significance, a palpable tension that held everyone captive. Then, with a deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness that seemed to stretch time itself, drawing out every second, making the moment monumental. Judge Eleanor Vance began to rise from her chair. The movement was slow, deliberate, and utterly unexpected, breaking every unspoken rule of courtroom decorum, every expectation of her role. The movement was so utterly unexpected, so contrary to every established courtroom protocol and expectation, that a ripple of stunned confusion spread like wildfire through the room. The bailiff, a burly man named Officer Miller, who had seen everything in his 30 years of service, from heated arguments to tearful confessions, from mundane traffic violations to harrowing murder trials, was caught entirely off guard. He half started to rise himself, then froze, unsure whether to intervene or follow this unprecedented action by the presiding judge. His eyes, usually impassive, widened slightly in bewilderment. The prosecutor, Mr. Davies, a slick, ambitious man whose career was built on predictable legal maneuvers and swift convictions, blinked, his mouth slightly agape, a look of utter bewilderment on his usually confident, composed face. He looked from the judge to Marcus, then back to the judge, searching for a logical explanation. Sarah Chen gasped, her hand flying to her chest, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning fragile hope she dared not yet acknowledge, a hope that felt too good to be true, too improbable for the harsh realities of this court. Judge Vance continued to rise, her gaze never once leaving Marcus, a silent, powerful connection forming between them, a bridge across years and social strata, across the chasm of time and circumstance. Her expression was no longer that of a judge presiding over a petty crime, detached and impartial, but of someone witnessing a profound historical moment, or perhaps acknowledging a sacred presence that demanded the highest form of respect. She stood fully now, her robes a dark, commanding silhouette against the bright window behind her, her posture stiff with an unspoken reverence that resonated through the silent room, demanding universal attention. The air was thick with anticipation, every eye fixed on the judge, then slowly, hesitantly, shifting to the bewildered man at the defense table, trying to decipher the meaning of this extraordinary tableau. The courtroom remained frozen in disbelief, a tableau of stunned faces, each person trying to process the inexplicable, the sudden rupture in the day's routine. Then, a few rows back, an elderly woman with silver hair, a seasoned court observer who had been knitting quietly through countless proceedings, her fingers usually nimble, slowly put down her needles, her movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. Her gaze, wise and knowing, shifted from the judge to Marcus, and she began to rise. Her movements were slow, deliberate, but resolute, as if she understood instinctively the gravity of the judge's action, recognizing a deeper truth that transcended the immediate charges. Then, a young law student who had been furiously scribbling notes, his pen poised midair, stopped, looked from the judge to the old woman, and with a flush of understanding that transcended his textbooks and legal theories, stood up, a newfound respect dawning in his eyes. One by one, like a silent unfolding wave, others followed. A few hesitant movements at first, then a cascade. The gallery, initially bewildered, began to understand, or at least to mirror the judge's inexplicable act of respect, a collective intuition guiding them, a shared sense of something profoundly important unfolding before their very eyes. The prosecutor, Mr. Davies, his initial shock giving way to a dawning comprehension and a sudden, deep respect that softened his usually rigid demeanor, slowly pushed back his chair and stood, his legal arguments momentarily forgotten, replaced by a sense of awe. Sarah Chen, tears already welling in her eyes, her hand now pressed firmly over her mouth to stifle a sob, was already on her feet, her gaze fixed on her client, a silent prayer forming on her lips, a desperate hope finally taking root in her heart. Even the bailiffs, usually stoic and detached, their faces impassive masks of professionalism, straightened their uniforms and stood at rigid attention, their faces reflecting a newfound solemnity, recognizing the undeniable weight of the moment. The entire courtroom was on its feet. Every single eye was on Marcus Jones, who stood bewildered, his head still slightly bowed, unable to comprehend why the world had suddenly decided to acknowledge his existence, why the crushing weight of invisibility that had defined his life for so long had been so dramatically and unexpectedly lifted. He felt exposed, vulnerable, yet strangely, profoundly seen, perhaps for the first time in years, a sensation both terrifying and deeply comforting. Judge Vance's voice, when it finally came, was thick with emotion, yet clear and strong, cutting through the profound silence like a beacon of truth, filling the room with its resonance. "Marcus Jones," she began, her gaze unwavering, her voice resonating with a deep, personal connection that silenced any lingering whispers and commanded absolute attention. "I served as a civilian legal advisor to the 101st Airborne Division during Operation Enduring Freedom in 2008. I was stationed at Forward Operating Base Salerno, a dusty, dangerous outpost in the heart of a war zone, a place etched into my memory with both the trauma of conflict and the profound gratitude for lives saved." Her voice trembled slightly, but her resolve was absolute. A collective intake of breath swept through the room, a shared gasp of understanding, as the pieces began to fall into place, connecting the homeless man at the defense table to a distant, brutal battlefield. Marcus's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers, a spark of recognition, raw and painful, flickering in their depths. The name of that base, that year, those shared traumatic memories, were a jolt to his system, pulling him back to a life he thought he had buried deep within his past, a life of purpose and profound danger that seemed a world away from his current reality. On May 17th of that year, the judge continued, her voice gaining power, a narrative unfolding before them, painting a vivid, harrowing picture of heroism that transcended the courtroom walls. Our convoy was ambushed. It was a clear morning, then suddenly, hell on earth. A devastating roadside bomb tore through the silence of the Afghan morning, ripping through the lead vehicle. Our lead vehicle was hit directly, exploding into a fireball of twisted metal and searing heat. Fire erupted, consuming metal and flesh, the screams of the wounded echoing through the valley, mingling with the crackle of gunfire. Chaos descended, a maelstrom of gunfire, desperate shouts, and the acrid smell of burning fuel and cordite. I was in the third vehicle, pinned down by enemy fire, unable to move, fearing for my life and the lives of those around me. We thought we were done for, trapped, helpless, facing certain death in that desolate, unforgiving landscape, surrounded by an unseen enemy. She paused, her voice cracking slightly, the memory clearly vivid and painful, as if she were reliving every terrifying second, the dust, the noise, the fear. But then, through the smoke and the screams, through the relentless hail of bullets and the terrifying explosions, A lone combat engineer under heavy, relentless enemy fire ran through the inferno, through the shrapnel, through the very jaws of death itself, to pull the injured from the burning wreckage. He didn't hesitate. He cleared a path for us to retreat, providing critical cover and unwavering courage that defied all logic, all self-preservation. He saved lives that day, including mine and those of my entire team, facing down death with a courage I have rarely witnessed since. Her eyes, now glistening with unshed tears, locked with Marcus's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, a bond forged in fire and sacrifice that transcended their current roles of judge and defendant. That combat engineer, she declared, her voice ringing with conviction, echoing the official citation and the profound truth of her memory, was Sergeant Marcus Jones. He was awarded the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States. A profound, almost sacred silence descended upon the courtroom, broken only by the soft sniffles from the gallery, as the weight of the revelation settled upon everyone present. The story, once a distant, forgotten memory, was now alive, echoing through the hallowed halls of justice, transforming the very air, imbuing it with a sense of reverence. The homeless man, the petty thief, was revealed not as a criminal, but as a hero, a savior, a man who had put his life on the line for his country and its people, a true embodiment of courage and sacrifice. The shame that had clung to Marcus for so long, a suffocating blanket of despair, began to dissipate, replaced by a fragile, unfamiliar sense of dignity and worth, a recognition he hadn't known he still yearned for, a warmth spreading through his chest. Judge Vance, still standing, cleared her throat, regaining her composure, her voice firm once more, but imbued with a new, profound purpose that resonated with undeniable moral authority. Mr. Davies, she addressed the prosecutor, her gaze unwavering. Given the extraordinary circumstances of this case and the defendant's distinguished and heroic service to this nation, a service that, I must emphasize, directly impacted my own life and the lives of my colleagues, allowing us to return home, I believe a fundamentally different approach is warranted here. Justice, in this instance, must extend beyond mere punitive measures and embrace the concept of restorative support, recognizing the immense debt we as a society owe to those who have sacrificed so much. Mr. Davies, his face pale but his eyes now filled with a newfound respect and understanding that transcended his legal training and professional ambition, nodded slowly, his previous arguments rendered meaningless by the weight of the revelation. He had witnessed something truly remarkable, something that transcended legal textbooks and courtroom procedures, a moment of profound human connection and a stark reminder of the true cost of freedom. Your Honor, he responded, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, yet clear and resolute. The prosecution, in light of these profound revelations and Sergeant Jones's selfless actions, moves to dismiss the charges against Mr. Jones, with the explicit understanding that he will be connected immediately with comprehensive veteran support services and housing programs. We believe this is not only the most appropriate and just course of action, but a moral imperative that we, as a society, must uphold without delay. He paused, then added, "It would be an injustice to do anything less." A wave of murmurs, this time of approval, relief, and even a few quiet cheers, swept through the courtroom, a collective exhale of shared emotion and a sense of profound rightness that settled over the room like a benediction. People nodded. Some wiped away tears, a palpable shift in atmosphere from grim formality to shared humanity. Judge Vance nodded, her gaze returning to Marcus, her expression softening, a gentle, compassionate smile gracing her lips. "Sergeant Jones," she said, her voice now imbued with a deep, personal warmth that reached across the bench, bridging the formal divide. "The court acknowledges your immense sacrifice and unwavering service to this nation. Your bravery, your selflessness, saved lives and upheld the very principles we strive to protect within these walls and beyond. The charges against you are hereby dismissed, effective immediately. Furthermore, I will personally ensure you are connected with every available resource, every program, every form of assistance designed to help you rebuild your life, to find the stability, the care, and the dignity you so profoundly deserve after all you have given. This court, and indeed this nation, owes you a debt of honor that can never truly be repaid. But we can begin to try to make amends, starting today, right here." She gestured with an open hand, encompassing the entire courtroom, inviting them to bear witness and to participate in this act of redemption. Marcus stood there, tears streaming down his face, hot and cleansing, washing away years of accumulated despair, shame, and the bitter cold of neglect. The crushing weight of the world, which had pressed down on his shoulders for so long, threatening to break him, was momentarily lifted, replaced by the unfamiliar, overwhelming burden of recognition, gratitude, and a fragile, burgeoning hope he hadn't dared to feel in years, a hope that felt like a new dawn breaking after a long, dark night. He had been invisible for so long, a ghost in the urban landscape, a forgotten figure, and now in the most unexpected of places, under the harsh, unforgiving glare of courtroom lights, he was seen. Not as a homeless man, not as a petty criminal, but as Marcus Jones, a veteran, a hero, a man who had once saved lives, and whose own life, perhaps, was finally about to be saved from the brink of oblivion. The journey ahead would be long, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he wasn't alone. The courtroom remained standing, a silent, powerful testament to the enduring power of respect, the quiet dignity of a hero rediscovered, and the profound moment when justice remembered its heart. The gavel did not fall with a sharp, final pronouncement of guilt or innocence, but remained suspended, a symbol of a different kind of justice, one rooted in empathy and acknowledgement. Instead, a new chapter began, not just for Marcus Jones, but for every soul in that room who had witnessed the profound and transformative moment when humanity and compassion intersected with the cold, impartial machinery of the law. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the most powerful acts of justice are not about punishment, but about recognition, redemption, and the enduring, unbreakable bonds of shared sacrifice that tie a nation to its heroes, even when those heroes have been forgotten.